last month's French Open win. There was no sign of rustiness from the second seed. He swept past Israel's Dudi Sela in straight sets to reach the second round. Now, finally, England's cricketers lost their first T20 match against India at Old Trafford by 8 wickets. None of England's batsmen could come to terms with spinner Kuldeep Yadav, who finished with 5 wickets, including that of Joe Root, who went for a duck. India reached their target of 160 with 10 balls to spare. The second match in the series is in Cardiff on Friday. Well, that is it from Sports Day. Coming up in a moment, the papers. I'm sure there'll be plenty of reaction to England's win on penalties. Bye-bye.
Hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me are Katie Balls, political correspondent for The Spectator, and The Guardian's deputy political editor, Pippa Crerar. Some of tomorrow's front pages are already in. The Financial Times is leading on the miner and commodity trading company Glencore facing an investigation by the US government into bribery and corruption. Metro are going with England's victory over Colombia as they make their way to the World Cup quarter-finals. The NHS makes the front page of The Guardian, which runs with the story that patients in England will have more access to DNA tests. And The Telegraph are leading with the man known as Nick, who alleged there was a paedophile ring at the heart of Westminster. He's been charged with perverting the course of justice. Well, let's start with the Metro. Front page, fantastic. Never in doubt. I don't know whether everyone in the country would agree with that.
I mean, we're obviously delighted at the result, but it did feel in doubt.
Just a few times.
Yeah, there were points when I was hiding behind the sofa and then on the way here, kind of hiding in the car. But no, it was a nail-biting match. And I think when it went to penalty shootouts, given that we have such a bad record with them, I think a lot of people thought it might be over, but they have proven us all wrong. So it's heartwarming and also probably good for the economy, side note.
Yes, exactly.
Because we have at least another few days of this, so that's good.
And I'm a Scot and I was supporting England, so yeah, there you go. It managed to overcome some old enmities there. Certainly brought us to the brink and back again, and to the brink and back again, and finally they got that important ball at the back of the net. So I think everyone's going to be pretty excited tonight.
Yeah, and it's a massive psychological breakthrough, isn't it? England are known to always lose on penalties. Everyone was dreading this. There were a lot of jitters, a lot of nerves. It does feel like a big breakthrough, doesn't it?
It really does. And I think it seemed that they were going to win 1-0 until the final few minutes of extra time. And I think had they got through that way, we'd be feeling less confident at them as a team. I feel like although the extra time was awful to watch, and then it was difficult to see this, you do feel like they've come through this and they've proven so many people wrong with that penalty shootout. I mean, Colombia looked distraught, but it was just when we missed the first one, I was like, it's gone. I was a pessimist. But I mean, Harry Kane keeps saying we need to believe, so I think it's going to get quite contagious in the coming days. And also a Saturday afternoon match is, I think, just a dream.
I'm just grateful for the BBC security guards because I got here and it wasn't on the big screen. It was the penalties. One of them had it on his mobile phone and let us all watch.
Fantastic. And there's been some and there've been some great shots of people peering into houses which happen to have big screen tellies. Right, lots of other stories to get through. So let's have a look at the Financial Times. The fuel tax rise, madness, says Tory MP. This was a story which the FT had earlier on today, on Tuesday, quite a backlash against it.
Yeah,
Pippa.
so this was actually the Guardian's exclusive yesterday, for this morning's paper, which was that the Treasury is seriously considering putting up, or rather lifting the 8-year-long freeze on fuel duty, and also on alcohol duty, which was frozen at the last budget, in order to help address the pressure on public finances. Obviously, the Chancellor is very reticent about rowing back in any way from pledges in the manifesto to tackle the deficit. And yet at the same time, the Prime Minister has promised 20 billion quid extra for the NHS and has loads of cabinet ministers, including for defence and schools and policing, trying to persuade her to give their departments a bit more cash too. So they're in a bit of a bind. If they don't want to borrow anymore, where are they going to get the cash from? The Brexit dividend, so-called Brexit dividend, well, there's a lot of scepticism around about whether that exists, and even those who think it does exist have some questions about when the money will start coming in and how much it'll be. So the Prime Minister had suggested when she made her NHS announcement that taxpayers would have to bear a bit of the brunt, and as the Treasury is obviously taking this seriously and looking at what it thinks might be the most, or the least, the most palatable way of doing this, and looks at the moment like it might be settling on fuel tax.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite a topsy-turvy situation we're in at the moment. I mean, the Conservatives are traditionally seen as the party of low tax, but they've kind of thrown this to, caution to the wind, announced a £20 billion funding package without working out how they're going to pay for it. I mean, a few weeks ago, just after they'd announced this, they summoned the more fiscally minded Tory MPs to the Treasury for what was described to me as an X Factor style competition of revenue raising measures, because they have to work out how to pay for it. On fuel duty, I do think this is going to be unpopular. The reason that we had an 8-year freeze on it is because it's an unpopular measure. And speaking to a few Tory MPs today, particularly those in marginals, they're not sure how it's going to land. That
hits
said,
a lot of businesses, hits a lot of ordinary users.
Yeah, and also with the oil prices rising, and so there's a chance there'll be a big backlash. The whole price rise will be blamed on the Tories. So I do think it's a tricky one, but then it's always going to be unpopular. But and we keep seeing all these polls, and this is what even health ministers will say to you: is the public say they want more money for the NHS, they do want more funding. But I do think there's a slight disconnect when it comes to what funding, because while I think most people will say yes, I would pay more tax for the NHS, I think you said, would you pay more fuel duty? And if you're more specific, I think that's when you start to come up with problems.
But then the issue they have is what's going to be the most palatable to the public. And while I think Katie's absolutely right that there'll be a bit of unrest on the backbenches, particularly those in marginal seats, people, obviously Robert Halfon, the MP, the former minister, has led a campaign on this and is likely to lead a fresh one, I gather. But would that be more palatable than, for example, freezing the increase in the threshold on income tax, or indeed putting up the basic rate for the first time since the 1970s? I think probably it would.
Some tough choices. And talking of unrest on the backbenches, unrest on the front pages and around the cabinet table as well. The Telegraph, Katie, has got May facing a cabinet revolt against the softest Brexit, as they put it.
Yeah, I think of all Theresa May's problems, this is a slightly more immediate one at the moment. And this all relates to the Chequers away day on Friday, where Theresa May is summoning her cabinet and they're supposed to decide on a negotiating position finally. And that centres on the customs arrangement. We've had 2 different customs arrangements floating around. It gets quite techie. You have the customs partnership, softer Brexit, max VAC, harder Brexit. Number 10 have attempted to heal wounds this week by saying there was a third way, a best of both worlds. But the Brexiteer suspicion, particularly today when details seem to leak, is that this third way is just the customs partnership, a little bit of fresh paint on it, but deep down it's ultimately still a very soft Brexit. And I think if that is the case, you're going to have a backlash.
I think the key point for me, though, at the end of this is getting some sort of agreement, and ultimately, really for them, it doesn't matter what that agreement is, as long as they can come out and emerge from the end of it and say, yes, we're all signed up to this, we're unified. Because of course, what we'll forget when we sort of like write about and talk about all these different fallouts in the cabinet and all the sort of different negotiations that are going on over which type of customs arrangement we want, is that it all has to be acceptable to Brussels. And as long as until we reach a point where the Prime Minister is able to say to Brussels, this is the British position, then there's not much that they can do, and Brexit will stall. So until we reach that point, and she'll be desperate to get there, really, and hopefully we'll see some conclusions.
Just briefly, we've got this
Friday.
Big cabinet meeting coming up on Chequers on Friday. That could be quite an occasion.
Yeah, and I think there's a real risk that as a way of maybe avoiding conflict, they come with another fudge, which is so complicated and hard to understand that Brussels will just say, what is this? And I think you've seen that this week with Ollie Robbins, who's Theresa May's chief civil servant, basically putting forward the case that they don't think they're going to get a bespoke deal. So the choices are this kind of Norwegian type deal or a Canada deal with not much extra. And I think that's the stark option facing them. So yeah, it does seem like we are finally getting to the crunch.
we await that meeting. To be a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
Pippa, your paper, The Guardian, talking about new DNA tests being rolled out across the NHS.
Yes, so this is a Guardian exclusive. Obviously, we're putting a lot of focus on the NHS this week, as it is in its 70th anniversary. And the story by our science editor, Ian Sample, here is that hospitals across England are going to be connected to specialist centres that can read, analyse and interpret DNA, patient DNA, to help diagnose rare diseases. And the second benefit of it, if you like, is that it's going to be able to not just provide more effective treatments faster to patients, but to act as a tool for research into diseases like cancer, and which would be able to help the population more broadly. Now, this is obviously a fairly significant advance if all hospitals are going to have it in England initially, and then potentially in the devolved parts of the UK later on, in England from the 1st of October. But of course it raises all sorts of ethical issues about, which we were discussing earlier, about how much information you really want to find out about your life chances, or your children's life chances, and what impact that might have on you.
And of course, what you do with it at the time. We've just about run out of time there. A lot more of the papers still to come. I think some of them have been delayed while awaiting the big result from Moscow.
Fair enough.
Excellent. For now, Pippa and Katie, thank you both very much indeed. And that's it for the papers this hour. We'll be back at 11:30 for a longer look. But for now, thank you both, Katie and Pippa, and goodbye.